Johnny? Anything? We can wait. There's no rush. You have an hour.
Resentment.
Let's move on. Anyone else? Yeah.
In your Dante lecture, you talked about the concept of like loving out of distance. What is that like? It was kind of lost to me in the lectures, but like, how do you balance that with human intimacy? As in, like, how do you keep yourself grounded in understanding humanity while also removing yourself and loving from a distance? Like you said that, like Jesus kind of removed himself and he loved himself from a distance. That made it kind of a bad philosophy to follow, where someone more like Malcolm X is. I can't think of it with humanity. What do you talk about?
I'm sorry. You know what? I wasn't listening.
Yeah, I use so many words. In the lecture, you.
I'm just kidding. I was. I was thinking about retirement this morning. Okay, let's move on. Can I tell you a story? Some of you have heard the story, most of you haven't. And though the story has many layers, let's just make it simple and somewhat literal, and mostly directed towards women, since they have it most difficult, because they have to interact with scumbags, namely men, if they happen to be heteros. So there is this king. It comes from this book, Arabian Nights, Hezaro Yakshab, Qaseh Shahrazad. It's about a king who is very attractive, also has a good amount of power. One of the nice things about this king is that he inspires a good amount of fear in people, so that when he demands something, you have no choice but to say yes to him. And then very much like Trump, I suppose, once he gets what he wants, he disposes of you. It's a young king, and so every night he has a woman in his bed. He invites them in, unrobes them, beds them. In the morning, he has his guards come in, the woman is taken away and hanged. It's, it's kind of like you buy a table from IKEA, you worship it, and then after a couple of years, you put it out there in the pavement for someone to take. Okay? And so after many, many weeks and months and years of doing this, it's time for this younger woman to enter his bedroom or his court, and her name is Shahrazad. In Persian, Shahrazad comes from two words. Shahr means a city, and Zad means birth. And if you were to look at this name metaphorically, it would mean that someone has the power to walk into your life, demolish most of the cities that we've built on desires and passions and memories, and then build a brand new city inside you. So she has the power to birth cities or new memories, that are powerful enough to get rid of the old ones. And so she enters the courts, and the king looks at her and says, "Disrobe." And the woman says, "No." I'm not really quite sure how the king reacted, but he wasn't too pleased. So he turns up the volume and this time screams at her, "Disrobe." And again, the woman says, "No." And the king says, "Please disrobe." And the woman says, "Okay, one condition. Let me tell you a story." Who dares to challenge this king? No one yet except this young woman. And because she's so attractive, she's so intense, and she knows well the art of lovemaking, the king has no choice but to say, "Okay, tell me the story, make it quick so we can have sex." The woman says, "Okay." So she begins the story, and it goes on and on and on and on for hours. And the king begins to yawn and fall asleep. He wakes up in the bed alone, looks at the woman. She's sitting on a chair in front of him and says, "Did the story end?" "No, no, no, there's some left to it." It's okay. Well, maybe you can finish it up tonight, and then we can have sex. And so the night comes, she begins the story, and it goes on and on and on and on. You know, it's like a Rambo movie. I have no idea how it concluded, and you can't fall asleep. And so the king thinks less about having sex with this woman and more about how the story is going to end. And so the following day comes, and the woman continues with the story. And it doesn't end. And this goes on for 1,001 nights. Do you know what happens to someone when you spend like 1,000 days with them? Imagination grows, fantasy grows, desires grow. And it's more than you just wanting their body. You know, you've grown attached to the way they look, you've grown attached to the way they smell, the way they make you feel, the way they make you think. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Hello, Terry. You're very kind. Thank you.
How are you?
How are you doing, Terry? It's good to see you.
How was your weekend?
It was awful, just awful.
Why?
You'll get there. Our words are cheap, you know. And so, we're telling them a story about women.
Oh.
Yes.
Okay.
And so, on the 1,001 night, the woman finishes the story. But by this time, the king had grown such respect for this young woman. He asked if she would lay with him in bed. She said yes, but before I do that, can I tell you another story? And so another 1,000 nights went by. And by this time, the king had fallen in love with her. Good morning. You know, sometimes you fall in love with someone, Matthew, and the ultimate gift is for you to lay next to them. That's the fruit, you know. But when it's not given to you, you have a couple of options. You either wait patiently until it comes, or you just say, "The hell with it. Just going to walk away from her and go to Terry." So, sorry, Terry, you'll get there. And so eventually they sleep together. She teaches him how to kiss and all the other stuff. And then she wakes up in the morning next to him. And like before, he wants to get rid of this woman, but he comes to realize he can't. And one of the nice things about the story is first, if you were to take it in a simplistic way, is if you're a woman, and I suppose heterosexual woman, if you like a man making weight for 1,001 nights, I don't know these days if any man is willing to wait that long, but make this person wait and wait and wait and wait. Because love, one of the things it does in intimacy is that once you become saturated, you lose interest. And once you lose interest, you become bored. And usually men have a good amount of power. They just walk away and the women just feel abandoned. So one of the nice things about the story is that if you're a woman and you like someone and this man likes you back the way you do him, just make him wait. You know, every time he says, let's have sex, you say, well, let's go have coffee, let's go for a walk, let's go hiking, you know. And then exhaust him until he just passes out on the sofa. You know, do this over and over and over and over again until he falls in love with you. And he's not going to fall in love with your body just yet. He's going to fall in love with the way you cook. He's going to fall in love with the way you make him feel. He's going to fall in love eventually with your emotions, the way you think about things, your parents. And then once you realize he's fully taken the bait and he's held hostage by these emotions and thoughts, then you can have sex with him. And he's not going to go anywhere. One of the nice books that came out, there are many books that talks about this particular topic, sex. One is Kama Sutra, the other is the Golden Lotus. Some of the books on the art of lovemaking that come from Egypt, the Sumerian tradition especially. It's about delayed gratification. You know, that you have, I don't know, a few days of foreplay, and then you have, at the very end, where you're satisfied. You know, and the foreplay is difficult. You know, it's like you ask a question, and I'm going to spend like 45 minutes telling you a story. And just as the class is about to end, then I'll give you the answer and we'll go home. That's how it is. Now, for something to be prolonged, it has to have some depth. In other words, if you just want to talk about tables and chairs of your bedroom or your house, the conversation is going to end very, very quickly and you will bore your companion. She will no doubt bore you. And then after 5-10 minutes, you'll say to yourself, what am I doing here? Maybe I should have just stayed home and watched the movie. You know, but if you are with someone who has a good amount of depth, and they're able to kind of withhold their body from you for a while, then that's somewhat attractive. It keeps you going, the chase. And that's what Dante is. Anyway, let's move on. Anyone else? Spike? I'm sorry, Janai?
So the 90-day rule is out.
The what?
90-day rule.
What's 90 day?
Well, they tell women to wait 90 days.
To do what?
To become intimate. I like the 1,000.
Yeah, 1,000 is good.
Yeah.
Yeah, when you're all like wrinkled up. Yeah. Anyone else? Indra? I'm really sorry about today's class. The truth is, very much like you, I don't want to be here. I'm just joking. What?
That's not the case for us, right?
I love coming to class. I mean, look. Kendra? I think today that's good.
About creativity.
You know, my teacher Hussein, whenever we sat to play music, like he would be screaming about politics, you know, usually with my father, because they were both political junkies. And so then after a while, some of us would grow tired of the conversation. I would go sit by the microphone, grab the sitar, Kazim would play the tombak, and we would play, and then 5 minutes later, Hussein would walk to us, sit, and then he would start singing. And what was most puzzling about Hussein was that how is it possible that like you engage in like this heated, intense, angry political conversation for like 3 hours, then within like 5 minutes you sit, you know, hold the microphone and you begin to sing this very sad song. You can just change so quickly. And one of the things that Hussein had the ability to do was, I'm not sure if he willed himself or it was just part of his temperament. You know, to will yourself to do anything requires really a good amount of effort and sacrifice. I mean, this morning I had to will myself to get out of the office and go to my meetings. I didn't really want to go. And you realize that it goes against, you know, just sitting in your chair, watching some YouTube clips, maybe writing a little bit, maybe just relaxing, drinking your coffee. And then you think about, man, I have to go upstairs to my meeting and they're going to talk about nonsense, you know, what the color of the bathrooms should be. Should we paint them pink or blue or yellow? Or maybe the bathroom should just be without doors at all. And so, yeah. Does that? No? So, anyone else? Terry? Karen? Discipline always goes against laziness. I mean, you have to do things that you don't like. And you discipline because there's an end goal. You know, I don't like sitting by the piano and doing the same notes over and over. I mean, that's one of the things you learn in music, especially playing the instrument, even singing, that there is about a 15-minute or 20-minute warm-up that's required, even if you're a singer. You know, you have to go up and down the scales. And if you're playing the piano, you got to like warm up the fingers. Just get your body ready, you know, and if you happen to be somewhat proficient, you kind of skip the warm-up and just go straight for the jugular. But the best players in the world, what they do is they warm up, you know, even if it's Pavarotti, who sings really, really well, or at least used to. They do the scales for about 15, 20, 30 minutes just to warm up the vocal cords, create their proper emotions. And oftentimes you say, well, why the hell do I want to do that? Let me just do what I want to do, which is, you know, play this tune. It has a good amount of passion. But they say, no, you should always warm them up. I mean, warm up your body, warm up your emotions, warm up your thoughts, and then go at it. For us novices, imagine I'm going to pick up piano. I mean, I don't know anything about piano except that I like the way it sounds. I never imagined a million years I have to sit and read notes, you know, and then figure out what key is what note exactly, and then place my fingers accordingly. And then I know full well that my left hand is not going to be independent of my right hand. And then it's going to take me some time for these two hands to gain some independence so they can move. You know, this hand is going to do this and that hand is going to do this other. And that takes time. And given the fact of technology, given the speed of this particular culture, given how ambitious I am and I want to really learn how to play like Chopin by like next month, you have all these forces assaulting my psyche, that the idea of sitting and reading notes and learning them by heart, that's going to take about a year or so. That's just too long of a time for me. So I'm always looking for a shortcut. And the truth is, to become good at anything, there are no shortcuts. You know, when you come to me and say, how can I write a good essay? Just wait till you're 85. Until then, think well, you know. And so you have to overcome a good amount of temptations. One of them just, it's difficult for the human body to sit and be disciplined. And so you need someone from the outside, either a teacher, maybe you respect your teacher so much that you don't want to disappoint him or her. And so out of that respect, you force yourself to sit and practice, you know, the same notes or the same scale over and over and over again until you become really good, you know. And then hopefully when your teacher comes in, she or he can say, wow, that's beautiful, bravo, inspires you, and then you can move on to the next sheet. Sometimes you really just need a parent to kind of just slap you, smack you, scream at you. So the slothfulness of your body and your mind doesn't overtake you. Because it can't come from within. It's too difficult. I mean, some people have it. You know, you can say, I'm just going to go on a diet. That's great. But if you're the only one of the things that used to work for us when we were very, very young in the month of Ramadan, which is the month of fasting for the Muslims, which I used to do for about maybe 15 years or so, is that we did fasting with a community of people. My parents did it. My teacher did it. All the people who were involved with my teacher did it. So when we fasted together. And if someone said, I'm not fasting today, we said, whoa, you're not fasting? Does Hussein know you're not fasting? You know. And so one of the nice things about community is that everybody does the same thing. And so you're just forced. And it becomes a great habit. When you're all by yourself and you have to overcome things all on your own, it becomes tremendously difficult. You know, if you live in a community where 15 people are reading the autobiography of Malcolm X and want to be like Malcolm X, it's much easier for you to abstain, to not fall victim to temptation. If on the other hand, you're the only one who reads the books and want to embody some of the ideas, but around you, there are no support system, maybe you can be like Malcolm for a day, maybe two. Eventually you're going to fall. It's not going to work out. So initially, discipline really needs to come from the outside, unless you have this ungodly passion and devotion inside you that you really love piano. You know, you're just one of those freaks of nature, where you don't need any force from the outside, and you're just willing to sit and practice and practice and practice and practice until you become really, really good. But those individuals are very, very rare. I mean, I don't know if, I'm sure some of you in this class have fallen in love. You know, you take workshops, how to overcome anger. It's very easy. Fall in love with someone. And most likely they'll say, I'll call you at 6 o'clock tonight. 6 comes, no call. 6:30, no comes. And you're boiling. You want to like go out there and just, you know, slit someone's throat. You know. And then the call comes at 9. And the guy says, I'm so sorry. Oh, why? Don't be sorry. Well, I told you I'd call at 6 and it's, 3 hours later. You listen, life is busy and now you try to act like a sage. I'm extremely patient. Oh, I wasn't even aware of time. What is time really? And you realize that, in 2 weeks' time, you fall in love and you're able to forgive and be patient and all that stuff. Just fall in love with the right people or the right person, and all the ailments that live inside you and I will just go away and you'll be disciplined. Easy. Dagan, anything? Yeah. Terry, what are you writing? Is it a love letter? No, it's not. It has bullet points. Olivia? Aaron? Richard? Yeah. It's okay. Yeah.
Does like spite or just spite as a motivator kind of play into
The what?
spite?
Spite.
Yeah. Spite, or whether just the concept itself or a motivator. Does that play into any like modern philosophies that you're aware of?
When the movie Sonic first came out, or maybe Spider-Man. I mean, the powers that they have, I became so envious of Spider-Man. I kid you not. This is not a joke. I'm not making this up. So I went to my parents' basement, infested with spiders. I just laid there, hoping that I would get bited. Is that a word, bited? I was hoping to get bited by the spiders. And a couple of them bited me. Yeah, you're laughing because what? I'm an immigrant. So after I was bited, I woke up hoping that I'll have all these spidey senses. I didn't. But the envy gave me some courage I didn't think I had. So, yeah, it's great. Spite, resentment, envy, jealousy, they're all motivators. You know, I mean, it's not good to like be envious of Snoop Dogg. I mean, first, he's a very unattractive man. Then his music is trash. But if, on the other hand, you were envious of Lil Wayne or Taylor Swift, these are like the geniuses of.
I don't think I'm.
Neither am I. Good for you. Anyone else? Spike? I'm sorry, Spike? Okay. I'll wait till you're done. Yeah.
Can you talk about acceleration?
What? The hell is that? You just put your foot on the gas pedal and you just. Where do you come up with it? Are you taking a class that talks about this stuff?
Well, you know, acceleration, the idea of you want to advance society to like a flashpoint tension, create change.
Flashpoint tension?
Yeah.
What the hell is that? I'm just young. I think if you were to look at civilization, societies, as like next week is Thanksgiving, and that's when people have turkeys, right? I think you should go and get yourself a big, fat turkey from Safeway. I mean, don't pay for it. Just go in there when no one's looking, put in your backpack, and walk out. Okay? And try to cook it really, really fast. And the way you do it is you season it a little, then you put in the oven, temperature 550, broiled. And no doubt, after like half hour or so, you open the oven and you look inside, and it's nice, it's golden brown. You take it out and you eat it. That's acceleration. The only problem is on the surface, on the outside, it looks really, really good. But when you put a knife to it and you cut it and serve it, you realize it's unedible. If it's frozen first, it's still frozen. And even if it's not frozen, it's not yet cooked. You know, so you're probably going to kill your guests. The only way to cook a turkey is you season it, you let it sit for a few hours or a few days in the fridge, and then you put it in the oven. And the temperature is like 300. And it sits there for about, 3, 4, 5 hours. And not only does it look good from the outside, it also looks good from the inside. Both in and out are beautiful. And I think societies are very much the same way. I remember when 9/11 happened here. When 9/11 happened, I was teaching at Sierra College. Now, I'm an immigrant. I'm from a third world where the country has been in social and political upheaval for many, many, many hundreds of years, you know. And so this is Rockland. It's relatively a new town. It's clean. Student population 16,000. 15,995 are Caucasians. You have 2 Middle Easterns, 5 African Americans. That's how diverse the school was. And so and this is like an episode that took place in New York. It travels through media to Rockland. And then you see all of a sudden all the classes being canceled. People are sitting outside and crying. And everybody's screaming, we've been attacked, we've been attacked. And nobody ever talks about America attacking this country or that country. For those of you who are interested in books that deal with, secret societies, namely how FBI and CIA have been to 60 different countries, toppled their government. It's called Killing Hope. It's a great book. And so you can have a single 9/11, and then you can all of a sudden create chaos psychologically for people. But then, like anything else in life, if it's not repeated over and over and over again, you forget, you know. And so what happens when you forget is you're unable to create a coherent and mature and refined philosophy of life, you know. Consider what happens when you go through a divorce. You're going to be angry for a long, long, long time. You're going to blame your companion, even though you're to be blamed for most of the awful things that happen in the relationship. It takes many, many decades for you to overcome the anger and to ultimately look yourself in the mirror and say, well, 90% of what went bad was my fault. But it took you about 20, 30 years. In other words, it takes 30 years for you to ultimately come to grips. And hopefully after that, you're able to make a nice little philosophy of relationships, of marriage, of divorce, of anger, of betrayal, all those things, okay? America, first of all, is far too young. You know, it has way too much power. It has way too much privilege. It is consumed by speed, by technology. It's also a quick fix culture. And most of the human issues, they really take a long time to get fixed. First you have to feel them, which is very upsetting. And then you have to be able to process them. That usually takes a few decades, if not centuries. And then after processing, you have to understand them. And then once you understand them, then you have to kind of sit down like a nice little honeybee, create a good philosophy of the event or life, and then find a vehicle to advertise it through literature, through media, where people are now exposed. How do you deal with death? How do you create music that's worth listening to? Even in this culture, I assure you, 50, 60 years ago, this culture would not allow people like Snoop Dogg on the scene, or Eminem. It would not be possible. Maybe Tupac, because his message was a bit different, you know. So what usually happens with a good amount of power, culture is very much like young people have no choice but to be very much like the prodigal son story in the Gospel of Luke. Anything that's young has no choice but to waste things. That's how it is. You can't make a 20-year-old all of a sudden think and feel like a 90-year-old man. You know, you're 23, right? Okay. Let's say you wanted to think and feel like a 60, 70-year-old man. Well, the only way you can do it, let's just say, I invite you to my house. And you have to come over to my house every single day. And then the way I live my life kind of exposes you to different perspective. The way I am, my thoughts, my culture. And when you come there every single day, you realize that you're beginning to like what I have to offer you. And then when you leave my house and when you go to your own and hang out with your own friends, you realize you like them less. And what happens if you spend 5 years of your life with me, By the time you're 27, 28, you wouldn't want to be part of this culture anymore. That, if my culture has anything valuable to give you. That's the only way, you know. What happens in America is that blacks become white, browns become white. Every culture, every person that comes here eventually has to submit to the dominant philosophy of life. That's how it works. Now, the only way that this can change is if you have some people on the top who happen to be Caucasian, little by little begin to change their perspective on life, adopting ideas from different cultures, more traditional, conservative cultures. That's the only way. And that usually takes time because once you get that, you have to expose the public to that. And they're not going to fall victim to that either. It takes a long time for the public to taste something and say, nah, this doesn't really taste good, you know? I mean, consider what Marx had said about women in capitalism, or in our case, I suppose, people and capitalism, that all of us have no choice but to turn into prostitutes. You have to bend over to someone who has more power over you. That's how it is. And why? Because you have to make a living. Why? You're looking for significance, relevance, visibility. That makes all of us into a whore or prostitute, right? But how do you sell that to the public? Like any food that tastes bad, you're going to spit it out until you're force-fed. And then little by little, you're going to adjust.
So I follow.
So the point is, you need a lot of tragedies in life. I mean, you really need Carlton in Prince of Bel-Air to be exposed to racism, to come to realize, yes, he is black. Yes, he lives in America. Yes, there are some things that are unjust and unfair. You can't, read books about that. It doesn't work. Oh, go ahead.
So earlier in the semester, I asked you about violence being justified, and you gave an answer that was sort of in the face of absolute oppression. There is justification for violence. So, in cases like, say, John Brown or Hamas, is there, when you're faced with a threat, external threat that wants to wipe out your very being, is creating a violent incident?
Okay, so let's talk about Israel and Palestine for a moment. Let me make sure that my blood doesn't boil, that anger does not overtake me. Right, Terry? Good job. So, there are a couple of things that you need to understand. Number one, for those of you in this class who go to therapy once in a while, why do you go to therapy? And why do you go to therapy about something that took place about 20, 30, 40 years ago? You're a 40-year-old, 50-year-old man. Why the hell are you going to therapy? Surely in the past 40 years, you must have figured some things out. You must have overcome whatever trauma that lived inside you. You haven't. Now you have cultural therapy or cultural trauma. Blacks have it. Okay? It's a traumatic experience. And you can't get over it like in 20 years. It doesn't work that way. What you're talking about is you have a group of people living somewhere. Okay? Then you have a body. The UN sits somewhere, looks at a certain group of people and says, okay, where should they go? Imagine, for example, the governor, Gavin Newsom, says, okay, where should the homeless in the Bay Area go? And they choose your apartment complex. They drop all of you guys out. And we say, what the hell? Well, the governor said so. And there are all these cops. You have no choice. Just because the governor said it's now legal, it doesn't mean that it's justified. It just means that you have a group of people sitting somewhere with their bellies full, okay? I'm not even going to bring the religious components into it just yet. And they say, okay, I think this group of people should go over here. And they say, well, there are already like hundreds of thousands of people living there. That's okay. We can just get them out of their house, push them out, vacate the land, and have these new people occupy them. Well, how are you going to feel? Don't think about Israel and don't think about Palestinians. Think about you, yourself, your parents. How would you feel if he's living in a one-bedroom and there was a law mandated where he and cops came over, pushed you and your family out, trashed all of your goods, and said, you guys go over there. Now you live in a mansion, but now you're forced to live in a one-bedroom, and he takes over. How long do you think it's going to take you? Will you create the scheme to somehow at night, late at night, go and slit his throat? Maybe. Will you go to therapy to overcome this? Maybe. How long do you think it's going to take you? So the first thing you need to understand is when you live in a physical location for a while, as Palestinians had for a long, long time, you're not just talking about houses built with mud or bricks or wood. You're talking about a relationship that people have with a plot of land. I mean, you should come to my house and look at the walls. It's filled with crayons, sketches. Do you not think I want to paint the wall? Of course I do. But these are memories that will be gone. And I'd rather just walk into a house filled with that nonsense. So in my old age, I can sit back and say, yeah, when this happened when she was 2 or 3 or 4. We hold on to memories. Okay? You're talking about all of a sudden, with a shock, like a traumatic experience, you just cut the umbilical cord. Just because some body of people say, well, the Jews are now in a legal position to occupy land, it doesn't mean that's the thing that should be done, but it's done nevertheless. Okay? Now, for 75 years now, you know, it's like you as a white man looking at a black man saying, look, slavery was like many thousands of years ago. Get over it. Redlining, what the hell do you do to that? Segregation, what do you do to that? All this philosophy that's being born in Texas, that we did slavery because of some ridiculous workforce. It wasn't really to oppress people. You know? What happens when trauma becomes internalized? That you look yourself in the mirror and you say, well, damn, I'm white or I'm black, I want to be white. You know, one of the scary things about Trump, if everything that he said is true, I've been here for 40 fucking years. All he needs to do is just sign a piece of paper that anyone who was not born in America needs to be kicked out and they need to reapply. It's not very difficult for them to legislate such things. The hell am I going to go? Who's going to fight for me? Am I going to pay some goon to hurt Trump? Probably. I mean, you can't just turn my life upside down and just tell me go to therapy for it. So the first thing you need to understand is, you know, people were just living their lives. All of a sudden in Europe, a group of people decide that this other group needs to go occupy, and they do. Okay. Native Americans have bows and arrows. Americans have guns. How long do you think bows and arrows are going to stick around? What do Palestinians have? A voice. They scream. Some rocks. What do the Israelis have? Military power. All come from the US. Now look at the lobbyists in Washington. 85% are Jewish lobbyists. Now, this is bound to piss people off. You know, Chief Seattle, who was a Native American, had said many times with the new America and its leaders, they said, they were reasonable. They said, listen, you can have this and this and this plot of land, but just don't go beyond that. Treaties were signed, they were broken. Promises were made, broken. And eventually Chief Seattle said, these are not people you can reason with. You just got to fight them. And they fought, and they lost. I think all of life can be perceived from two angles: the perspective of the privileged and the powerful, and the perspective of the oppressed. The emotions that live inside him will never live inside you. It's not possible. Unless you have a profoundly abusive father. Then the two of you have many, many things in common. He has suffered cultural abuse, you have suffered parental abuse. But at the very core, what you have is oppression. Now you guys can speak the same language after some time. You know, the language of the oppressed will never be understood by the privileged. It's impossible. No Israeli can. And the other, let me also say that if you were 20 and just moved to Palestine as a Jew, you must have had a very, very long life, because right now you're probably about 95. Most of the people in Israel right now, they're young people. That's the only country they know. They're also a victim of the UN's proposition. Because they have no idea why Palestinians are doing what they're doing. They have no idea why Palestinians are so angry. And very much like Palestinians having this deep, intense relationship to their land, Israelis in Israel too have this deep relationship to their land, Israel. And if by force they were to move out, if, for example, all the Arab countries came together and drove out the Israelis from that land, well, you have a 30 or a 40 or a 50-year-old man who was born in Israel, who has kids born in Israel, married in Israel, parents in Israel, they have burial sites in Israel, and now they're moved out. Well, they're not going to take this sitting. They're also going to fight. And that's what the world does. The world just creates cruelty everywhere. And then somehow it wants to resolve it. I guess in the end, what I'm trying to say is just very complicated. There are no easy answers. There really isn't. I think Krishnamurti, the Indian philosopher sage, who died some years ago, he had said that even if the human race was to be wiped out completely, except one man and one woman, and they would get together and have sex and babies, they would end up in the same place. I mean, for those of us in this class who've been in relationships, we'll tell you that you may have had 20 years of a good marriage. One single fight with your companion will make you doubt the relationship. One single fight. We're not talking about a very complex social and political issue, the stuff that's taking place in the Middle East. You know, in 1911, the entire map of the Middle East was reshaped by France, England, and America, and British. 1940s, another reshaping. You know, and it's bound to make people angry. I mean, go to what we talked about on the board some time ago. First you're irritated, then you become frustrated. Then you want to figure out why, you know, it's this way, and you can't, then you get confused. Then you have, you know, irritation, confusion, frustration coming together. Now you have anger. But, you know, you're talking about the Middle East. It's a culture where people swallow their anger for the most part. They don't show it, you know. And then you become enraged. It's like anger times 20, but you still keep it inside. When you express it in a violent way, It means that the culture can no longer hold it within. It's too much. I don't know if you ever peed in your pants, have you? Probably have, I have. You know, and that's how it happens. You have this feeling that you need to go to the bathroom. You say, no, I can hold it. Then you go for a long walk and says, no, you know what? I think it's dripping. And before you know, your pants are wet. And that's how anger and violence work. When you try to make things work, it doesn't, then it erupts. The issue about Palestine and Israel really is the issue created by the West and ultimately becomes a Western issue. And there are reasons you do this. You know, Israel is a bulldog to keep all those countries in check. And it's, you know, being fueled financially, militarily by the West. Any, yes, you know.
So I guess about.
And then add to it. Yeah. What do you think if you're like a human being who thinks well about this stuff, you really have to justify both sides. You have to feel bad for the Jews in Israel, you have to feel bad for Palestinians, but you have to feel bad more for Palestinians, I think. I mean, everybody talks about Muslim terrorism. Have you ever examined the terror that came out of the Christian world for centuries? Nobody talks about that stuff. Why? Because the media is controlled by Christians and by Westerners. Yeah, Junaid. I like you. By the way, my conversation today has nothing to do with you guys in the class. Even though, yeah.
I guess about consequences, right? Earlier you said something like, oh, he didn't call until 9. And she's like, oh, I just let it go. And then you had to
He didn't what?
call, he was supposed to call at 6, but then
Oh, yeah.
she just let it go.
Yeah.
Right? So I have a kindness of these messages, and so I'm going to read it. It's Proverbs 24. Whoever says to the guilty, you are innocent, people will curse him and nations denounce him, but it will go well with those who convict the guilty, and rich blessings will come upon them. So do you feel like time changes or consequences have a bigger effect on?
First, I didn't really understand what you read. It sounded French to me. I mean, but I have to like read it like 20 times to understand. And also, that's King James or Queen James?
The New International Version?
Yeah. The problem with these books is that so many things get lost in translation. But it's nice poetry. So what's your question?
Does consciousness have a greater effect for change versus time? You said it took them 20 years to realize and process and make meaning, but would consequences progress that?
I'll tell you a story from Sa'di. Sa'di was from Shiraz. Shiraz is in Iran, and it goes back to the 13th century. So what you have is a mother around the 13th century gets a text message. You guys get that? So she gets a text message that your son is in jail. He stole something, he got caught. So this poor woman walks to this place. The son comes out, the mother slaps him and says to him, why did you steal? You should have never done that. Now this is like a 30-year-old young man. The young man looks at the mother and says, do you remember when I was 2 and you took me to this shop and I stole a piece of something and you never said anything to me? Had you slapped me then, I wouldn't turn out the way I did today. I suppose it's something that all of us do if you enjoy gardening, that you plant this nice rose bush and all of a sudden you see a weed grow next to it. You just go and grow this tiny little thing out because weeds grow really, really quickly and they overtake the entire rose bush, in fact, the entire garden. And there are a couple of things that need to happen. First, you need to really get yourself in a place where you clean this plot of land. And that takes a lot of effort. I mean, imagine you have a very hard ground. You take your hammer or jackhammer and your body is relatively petite. It takes a lot of effort on your part to till the ground, and you do. And then you get some soil and you mix them together. Now it's a beautiful tiny place, and you go and you spend $50 on a rose bush and you plant it, which means that you actually care for the space in which you live. And then you water it every day. There is no irrigation just yet, okay? You go down the hill, you grab some water from the river, you come up, you nourish the plant. And then you see this weed growing next to it. Well, you pull it out. Do you have compassion for living things? Yes. But you place more value on the rose than on the weed. So you pull it out. Is weed a living organism? Yes. Are you willing to destroy it? Yes. For what? For the sake of the rose. Is your killing justified? Yes. And then what you have is like this beautiful garden in the backyard. You and your family go in there, the fragrance is beautiful, you sit there, you watch the sunset, and the roses are dancing for you. The point I'm trying to make, if you look at this, there are all these stages you go through. You really need to actually care for the things that you plant. And you want to make sure that they survive, they have a long life. And so you are very much aware of, the weeds that could grow around it. And, yeah. So, this may not be related, but it may, but I'll tell it to you nevertheless. And I mean no offense by what I'm to say. So, imagine, Junai, that you and I get married. You're like 20, you're 18, 16. Yeah, let's make you young. You're 16, it's permissible. I'm talking about like 10 years ago. You're 16 and available and your parents are okay with it, and I'm like 30. Men need to be a bit older, okay? So we get married and you have a nice ceremony. We go home and we do what birds and bees do. And 2 weeks later, you have triplets. And Middle Easterners are very powerful people. Okay. And then the following week, I die. And all of your kids are girls. You can't get remarried. You raise these kids on your own. The idea of bringing another man into your life, the possibility of this man eyeing one of the girls. So you know what you do? You just get rid of the weed called the temptation to get married. Just in case you're alone, you find refuge in your kids. No weeds. Just in case you don't have that particular culture, what happens is, okay, we get married, you have kids, I die. Well, this culture advertises loneliness and then depression and then this and then that, then you bring Matthew in. Well, how long do you think Matthew is going to lose interest in you? I'm not saying it's going to happen for sure. The possibility, that's all you need. Possibility. And so, just in case that possibility occurs, well, your girls will need therapy for the rest of their life. That's like 3 lives ruined. Why? Because the culture is a bit nonchalant about these things. It recognizes that human beings, in many ways, are just flawed. You just can't trust them. Rightly so.
So then the consequence would be I would slit his throat and then he wouldn't do it again. Right? So a consequence, if you just let him go, then the possibilities can happen again.
Yeah, but if I'm your boyfriend and I'm abusive and you call me and say, Amir, get lost, make sure that you have a tough skin where you can endure loneliness. Be creative with it. Hang out with your girlfriends. I'm not saying these are easy things. Okay, idealistically, it's nice to get rid of me and live a life like a nun. Is it possible? Probably not. Is it a nice story? Yeah, we like stories. Terry, yes. Terry. Listen up, Terry speaking.
What elements are needed to be in a question to make it philosophical?
I think if you were able to really, really understand the question that you're asking, you would not ask it. So many times when people ask questions, 99.9% of the times they don't really understand it. They really don't understand the question. Okay? So that's the first thing. Because when you ask a question, it also suggests the following. Some questions are physical. Some questions are emotional. Some questions are intellectual. And some questions are spiritual. So some questions are a bit more meaty. Imagine you're asking a question about oppression. Now, in my privileged white ears, okay, I'm going to intellectualize this question. You, on the other hand, being from a different race, a different background, the question is like 20% intellectual, 80% emotional. And my response is not going to do much for you. So oftentimes the student and the teacher, to some extent, have to be in the same place. And by that I mean the following. You can ask a question from me. I'm going to respond to it. Your task is not to understand it. And my delivery is not supposed to be an intellectual mode. I'm not supposed to give you a discourse. My job is to give you a sermon. The sermon is the feeler type. When you feel, you take the bait. And if you're able to stay with the feeling generated by me, day after day, week after week, months after months, what will happen is that eventually, at a certain point, your intellectual body will kick in. Now you want to understand the question, now you want to understand the emotions that generate the question. Then the next step is you understand why you're asking, how you're asking. Now you want to know, well, how do I express it now? Now, since you're asking me, for example, a question, it also depends on my temperament, it depends on my background, it depends on how much I care about my image, in public. Do I want to give you a scholarly answer to impress you? Or do I want to just come out and say your question is stupid? Let me tell you how you should ask it. There are so many different layers involved. All questions, because they come from human beings, are philosophical. There are no non-philosophical questions. And I say that because I have a tendency, and I think anyone who's good at anything, it's like you happen to be a great pianist and you're walking and all of a sudden you watch the leaves dance and you say, I want to go home and create a music sheet for this. And all of a sudden, the leaves become an extension of piano, of music. And I think if you happen to be just a reflective human being, you turn everything into something to reflect on. And that would make you a very, very serious person. I mean, if you keep reading books about African American history, music, the function of music in early African American tradition, When you would go to gatherings, you would ruin their parties because everybody wants to dance, and you say, no, I want to understand why you guys are playing this music. You know, no different than Reginald asking or telling Malcolm X why he would like to dye his hair yellow or orange or black or blue or white. You know, so you can't really hang out with serious people too much or for too long. They just ruin you. Does that? No.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was, people here that usually ask questions. I was thinking about that would be a good exercise for us to split in groups and come up with a philosophical question within those groups.
Oh, you mean like?
If that's okay with you, it's pondering over the weekend how to mix things up, make it more people oriented, relating to individuals and their daily experiences.
That's a great suggestion for a different class. And I'll tell you why. When I was young, days where I was feeling a little tired or didn't really have much to say, I would have group exercises, like 5 groups. And then I would give them something to do, like dogs. They would hand over these things, and they would, the last like 15, 20 minutes of the class, everybody would share their insights. And then sometimes they would divide the class into 2, talk about some political, moral issue. And then I came to realize, well, it's really fun for students, but it's torturous for me because people just don't have much to say. So I said, let them suffer. I think the best group exercise is you collect yourself, all these different parts of Terry, bring them into one group. And then have all these different parts of Terry get together and come up with a good question. That's a group exercise. Because, there is a Terry who's black, there's a Terry who's a little white, there's a Terry who's American, there's a Terry who's African, there's a Terry who's 18, there's a Terry who's 40, there's a Terry who's depressed, there's a Terry who's sad, who's happy. I mean, these are all Terrys with different desires and passions and pursuits. Bring them together. Make peace with them. And then give me a question. That'll take you about 20 years. Go ahead.
You, outside individuals who think that we can define ourselves or the other people define us.
I think initially you need someone from the outside to define you. You understand love when you scream and your mom comes to you. You understand care and compassion when your belly aches and someone has to tap your back to get the gas out. You understand love and compassion of whether or not you're liked as a kid when you scrape your knees and your mom or dad or someone runs towards you. You say, okay, I have some importance. So initially a good amount of who and what you are comes from the outside until you grow tired of being the creation of forces on the outside. Initially, you need that. Then there comes, look, we are very much like fruits in the sense that you have, like an orange, you have a skin, and then there is the meat, the orange within. They're both needed, okay? The meat without the skin, the orange without the skin, it would just go bad in days. Okay? The skin without the orange is useless. Okay? So you need both. So in some ways you could say that the skin allows you to say, that's an orange. It's given me a desire, I want to go and eat an orange. That the skin becomes a symbol. Then you grab a knife, you trash the skin, and you eat the orange. Okay. Sometimes you use the skin to mix it with rice, as we do. Okay. There is a part of you that's the skin. In other words, your history creates this outer layer of who Terry is. It's what we call personality. All the angers you have, all the joys, all the pursuits, all the ambitions, all the 7 deadly sins. That is given to you by your external forces and history. Then there is the meat, the essence. You want to call it your soul, you can. You want to call it creativity, you can. It doesn't really matter. But it has nothing to do with your skin. Although sometimes your skin can enhance, refine what lives inside you. Okay. Now, for you to get this, to get the meat, very much like an orange, you need to grab a knife. You have to get rid of the skin. If I was to be a bit more blunt, I would say it this way. If you are interested in becoming an African American, you have to get rid of everything you know about it. And then you have to swim in books, in literature, in workshops given by Malcolm, by Angela, by maybe traveling to some places in Africa. You know, being seasoned by literature, by experience, then coming back. And then when you come back, your own American history, okay, the experience, and this brand new experience now will have a good meshing period. Once you process it, then you can exercise both worlds really, really well. You know, it's kind of like when you want to make peace with your father. Your father has given you a good amount of anger, that then you say, you know, my life is ruined. You go to a therapist, and a therapist is nothing but a knife. Hopefully you can use your therapist's ideas to cut away the trauma little by little until you become clean. And then you go back to your father. Now you've processed the emotions well, the history well, who your father is, why your father is this way. But then slowly you can walk back into the world. And now you have the best of both worlds. You know, you can deal at least with the anger a bit better. But you need both. You need the personality and you need the essence. You need the piano, the body of the piano, but you also need the proficiency of sitting by it and playing in a way that brings the emotions out. And forgive me, some of you in this class, people of color have a lot of wonderful things to work with because that's what history does. History just plants things inside you. And should you ever become interested in refining certain parts of yourself, you have things to work with. If on the other hand, you're born in a place of privilege, you know, and there isn't much trauma inside you, well, there isn't much to work with. Someone needs to create trauma inside you. You know, if you have a good marriage, you don't think about your wife. If you have a fight, you think about your wife all the time. You know, if you like yourself, then there is nothing to think about. If on the other hand, you're being pushed by all these different forces on the outside, you're constantly thinking, what does it mean to be Terry in this culture? You know, I mean, the only reason I come to office at 4 a.m. now is because time forces me. I look at time differently. I look at myself differently. I look at death differently. Olivia? Wolf?
Can it be viewed like death can be like a motivator?
Death?
Actually get things done?
It can be a great shortcut in the sense that, you know, there is a scene in, I think, Rocky movies where his coach has died and Apollo is now training him. And Rocky's a little depressed because first he lost the fight to Clubber Lang, I think. His coach died. And Apollo is trying to train him how to sprint, and he says, tomorrow. And Apollo says to him, Rocky, there is no tomorrow. But he doesn't hear that. He just gets lost in the ocean. He's walking the shore. You can get things done with the prospect of death, if you think about it. What usually death does, it's kind of like what we talked about a couple of days ago. It really removes your past and it removes the future from you. You get really sad and depressed. You kind of enter the state of paralysis for a long, long time. Because what death does is that it removes whatever you thought to be meaningful in the past. It removes whatever you thought is meaningful about your future. And you're young. And young people has stupid dreams and hopes. At least 99.9% of them. You may be exempt from this, okay? So I apologize for that. Now, what remains for you as a young person thinking about death all the time is, since there is no future and there is no past, because death is right there, it's immediate. I can die. It's kind of like Martin Luther around the 15th century talking about sudden death. That just in case you die right this minute and you find yourself in the presence of God, God is going to look at you and say, so before I took you, what exactly were you doing? Now, you better have not been watching porn or smoking or masturbating or reading a philosophy book, And so what happens now is you have an empty bucket. And then you say, okay, since death has made everything irrelevant and meaningless, what can I put inside this bucket that's meaningful? Now, that's after the moods of paralysis, because without past, there is no future. You are in school because someone told you that if you do this, 10 years from now, you'll have your master's or a PhD, you'll be in a cubicle making 200,000, you'll get married, you have a house. So you're planning your future based on what you're doing now. When death comes about, everything is gone. And now the big issue is, what do I do with now? What do I do with now? What's worth doing? And for the longest time, the answer is nothing. Because it's so intensely emotional initially. Okay. Once you're saturated with the emotions, you're no longer an emotional junkie, so to speak. You say, okay, let me think about this. I am going to be living with death. Let's make the best of it. It may be that in your case, you'll just walk your dog every day. You go hiking. You'll enjoy eating food. Maybe you'll enjoy conversation. Maybe you'll write a book. Maybe you'll walk into hospice or child life services and you volunteer. And it also depends on how you're going to die. If I have cancer and I'm in pain, it's very, very different than when I'm intellectually imagining my death. But by the time you get there, you're probably ready for it anyways. In other words, because of excessive amount of reflection or intimacy with death, you kind of prepare yourself. That's what emotions and reflections on death do for you. They prepare you. And then it really doesn't matter what you do. Mostly you'll be fine. Yeah. Terry?
Since we are talking about death, I are a lot of humans obsessed with death.
Obsessed?
Obsessed with death, and they are alive.
I don't think people are obsessed. How many times have you talked about death in this class? How often do you yourself think about death?
Think about it in general.
Why? Is it time? 25. So we have another hour? There is this great book that comes from the Hindu tradition called Katha Upanishad. Upanishad means sitting at the feet. Usually it's translated as sitting at the feet of your teacher, but in this case, you sit at the feet of your teacher, who happens to be death. So you learn from Yama, the Lord of Death. And this tiny kid, Nachikitas, goes to Death and says, and Death, of course, says, "What the hell are you doing here? Go back home. Have a good time with life." And he says, "I can't." "Why?" "Well, my father is angry. If I was to go back home, will you promise that my father will be happy with me?" "Sure." "Okay, if I was to go home, will you promise that my mom will make me chicken tikka masala?" "Yes." And Death has given Nachikitas 3 wishes. "What's your 3rd wish before I send you back home?" "Who am I? What am I?" Death says, no, don't play that game. Go get married. Ask me for a wife. Says, no. Ask me for a kid. No. Ask me for money. No. Ask me for some political power. No. I want to know who I am. Give me wisdom. And that's one of the things that Death does, being obsessed by death, because it makes everything insignificant, including yourself. And then you want to know who you are, what you need to do. You really want to understand who and what you are, and that's the most difficult part. And that's what the book is about. It's a very, 20 pages, where Yama says, not even the gods come to me asking that question. So you must be very, very either brave or stupid to be wanting this idea of self-knowledge. When you say obsessed, if you, again, can stretch your memory back to when we put this stuff on the board, you become curious about death. You become interested in death. You become obsessed. And obsessed means you've spent a good amount of time with something that it occupies every part of you. And then obsession, after that, is like cancer. From stage 1, it goes to stage 4, and it kills you. Everything that you are, every way that you think about, has a good amount of death in it. See, my father will die soon, but it's interesting is that they don't want to talk about it. Neither does my mom. And every time I bring up the subject, what do you guys think about this? Let me read you this, or let's listen to this kind of music. They like it, but they don't want to be overly obsessive. Because my mom will be sad. My dad will be sad. What the hell are you going to do with sadness? Especially at the age of 90. Jesus. I mean, my father is no Jesus Christ, walking towards his death peacefully. No. He hangs on to life. Anyone else? Wait, is still here. Erin, anything? For those of you who need to leave, it's okay.
What is in internalizing?
So ridiculous.
That's a really, really, really good question. One of our friends was recently diagnosed with breast cancer. She was very young. I think 28. She has 3 kids and a husband. I remember in the past we've talked somewhat about death. She never came to visit me when I was doing my heart surgery, even when I was recovering from it. she treated the whole thing in a very arrogant way, which was okay. And in conversation, she would oftentimes be very mean-spirited, very mean in the way she would express things, very offensive at times. She never imagined that this would ever happen to her. I think no one does. We always look at things from the outside, you know, that his son is going to die, not mine. He's going to fail the class, not me. He's going to be pulled over by the cops, not me. And then all of a sudden, this thing has happened to her. She doesn't want to talk to anyone. She doesn't go anywhere. Whenever she's invited, she refuses the invitation. And for the first time, she comes to realize that she's become very intimate to something that she only thought about once in a while. That was a foreign object for her. Death, having cancer, that's spreading quite rapidly in her body, losing her children. That's how you internalize things, that they become part of who and what you are. You know, I think first or second day or third day of this class, you asked some question about, I don't know what question you asked, but the first thing I asked you was, were your parents born here? And you said no. So I assumed that they were immigrants, and you said yes. I'm an immigrant. My parents are immigrants. Immigrants don't come here because they love leaving their land. They make a lot of sacrifices in leaving. It's a traumatic experience, and they do so only for one reason: to make sure that the kids have a future that they themselves didn't have. And then I asked your age. You said you're 29. And the truth is, I did the same thing you have done to your parents. I have been a complete disappointment. And I can speak of that because I can internalize not only your experience, but also what your parents have gone through, because I've done it myself. So to be able to internalize something, first it has to touch you in ways that usually we think about these things, but intellectually we think about them. You know, you may sit there and say, Amir Sabzavar is a really, really boring instructor. It's fine. Let's just say one of these days someone comes to you asking for an advice about something you're really proficient at, and you try to educate them, only to realize they're not really paying you attention. That they don't really care about your experience. They don't care about the sacrifices you made to understand that particular issue. And now you sit there calling me boring, and now you say, wow, I'm trying to explain this thing to this kid, and he looks at me and he's completely bored. That's how you internalize. You become intimate with it, and it's intensely emotional. Oftentimes we just reflect on things, look at things from far away. You know, it's like any young woman who says, I want to be a mother. It's great, good for you. It's a great dream, desire to have. And then you become. And then sometimes you sit somewhere in your room and you say, why? This was a big mistake. It happens once in a while when you're just completely exhausted, or your kids are like in high school, you know. And so that's what internalization is. You're just touched by the things you thought about only. چه خبر؟ Anyone else before we... Alexis? Anything? Olivia? Janai?
So if emotions can be addictive, then how do you control your emotions?
Well, oftentimes you don't really have to. What we have a tendency of doing mostly in life is to control our environment. You scream at your kid for 5 minutes, so you don't have to scream at her for like an hour. You know, sometimes you do it calculatively, educatively, and sometimes you just explode. So You can have feelings about things, you can have emotions about things, but they're usually under a very, very controlled environment, that you have power over those things. Sometimes life creates events, and those events remove power from you. And then you find yourself plunged in poverty. Poverty in the sense that you have no control over thoughts, you have no control over emotions. You're confused, you're irritated, you're frustrated, you're angry. Not only are you angry at the person, you're also angry without really being aware of it, that you can't really control what's happening. And then you explode. The best thing you can do is have a great amount of power when it comes to money. Buy a house and then pay it off if you can, so that the government or your landlord has no power to evict you. That's number one. Find the right man so that he doesn't create the wrong buttons and then push the wrong buttons. Make sure your kids go to good school. And these are all just shots in the dark. And what you're doing is you're saying, hopefully 60% I'll be in power and 40% the randomness of life. You know, and that's what we do. We just exercise a good amount of power. There are, for me at least when I was younger and had a teacher, it was such a wonderful thing to have zero power when I went to my teacher. I had zero power financially, zero power emotionally, zero power intellectually. So I went to him like an empty bucket. Could he have been a charlatan, exploited, abused me? Absolutely. Luckily for me, he wasn't like that. Okay. I could have worked for the state. You know, I could have washed cars. I chose to teach without really knowing how it would be. Luckily, I chose a profession that I have some power, intellectual power and emotional power, and some life experiences, and I can put them all together and it becomes a relatively edible soup. You know? And so the friends I choose, they have to kind of be able to use their brains a little bit. You know, the movies I watch, the books I read, the conversations I have. Is it true that sometimes I fall victim to stupid things? Absolutely. Am I myself stupid most often? Definitely. But, you know, there are elements of my life that I enjoy very, very much. Most of the elements, you know. Could I be diagnosed with cancer tomorrow? Yeah. Luckily for me, you know, I've been thinking about this stuff for a long time, so it's actually a good thing for me to just walk away from life altogether. You know, there isn't much it can offer me, or me offer it. It's just good to have a good amount of power in life. It's also good, you know, what we talked about the other day, good to know your emotions, how they come about, how they play, you know, how they intoxicate you and how you react. I mean, every time you want to go nuts because your girl is wearing something inappropriate, you always have no choice but to take yourself to Junaid. Remember when you were 20 or you were 12 or 5 or 6 or 7 and you had these intentions for wearing, your girl is no different. Let her wear the stuff, take her to church though. Let her find a boy who's going to church. I mean, I don't know. You have to create some physical spaces. All I remember when you asked me this question is when my kids were very, 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 very young and they would scream. Not that they don't now. I would always say, I mean, I would be pissed. And then I would catch myself, Amir, she's only like 6 months old. What do you expect? Life is just there to get rid of any power that you have. And your task is to combat that. Life is there to remove power. Your task is to find ways to gain power. Yeah. But really, it does start from the very, very basics. This may be a little too personal. I'll share it with you. I was roommates with a Persian young woman many, many years ago. And in our culture, once you become roommates, you just get married. She was so vicious. I said no. Her father called me. She'll be better. No. And my parents abandoned me for weeks. Her parents abandoned me. My family didn't talk to me. I just didn't care. Because I could picture my life with her. Every single day fighting, and going back and forth, and I just couldn't do that. And I didn't give a shit about being alone. I've been alone most of my life. You know? And sometimes I do wonder, you know, if I had chosen that particular relationship, what would have become of me? You know? And then there was a woman who came into my life and she had multiple sclerosis. I adored her. I really liked her. But picturing myself going to Kaiser every single day, and then my parents couldn't visit, I couldn't visit them, you know, she couldn't have kids, not that I wanted kids. And I just propelled my image like 20 years down the line. Can I do this? My answer was no, so I walked out. I had to be kind to myself as opposed to kind to this other person, and I didn't mind. So you need to really have an image of your future. Like, who do you see yourself? What do you want for yourself? And then if you have to some extent, a clear image. I mean, you see these three young women here? They've all been infected by philosophy and humanities, all of them. That's their life. And they're all teaching. And they can't hang out with a companion who talks gibberish for too long. They can only tolerate garbage for so long. You know, that's a good amount of control over the trash of life. It's a good life. It doesn't make you very much money. Doesn't, you know, reflection is a difficult thing. It has a good amount of darkness and gloominess to it, but it has its own rewards. آدمی در عالم خاکی نمی آید به دست. آدمی دیگر بباید ساخت و از نو عالمی. That if you want to change who you are, your past can no longer do that for you, and your present can no longer do that for you. You need a complete overhaul. You know, I mean, your psyche is no different than an engine of a car that's just burnt out. You just need to get rid of it and put a brand new thing in it. If your decision-making abilities or its foundation always chooses the wrong things and you suffer for it, or someone needs to go inside your brain, get that brain out, replace it with a brain with different narratives, different neurons that connect the messages differently. And that usually takes time. And that's usually the job of teachers. You know, they have to, and that's, no one knows where you can go to find them. They're usually in the dark. You know, and it's always difficult getting rid of your past because we're so attached to it. You know, one of the things I miss about myself is my ability to find someone who's interesting, to knock on the door every weekend and sit and just listen. I have too much garbage in my head now. I'm far too arrogant, far too educated. That's the poison that lives inside me. And I miss those days where I longed and I was extremely passionate to just go and worship someone. That no longer exists for me. You know, if on the other hand you've come to realize that there are certain things you've done that has given you some negative consequences, that's a good poverty to be in. You know, you just need to find someone that you could worship and allow them to just rewire the way you think about things. 10 years. You're 30. It's nothing.
Are you familiar with Neville Goddard?
No. What is it?
He's a speaker who talks about imagination and rewriting your story of your past. Like, that you see at the end now.
The problem I have with that is that's not my tradition. In my tradition, you can't do anything on your own. You know, you need someone from the outside, i.e., a teacher, to kind of reprogram you and rewire you and protect what they have injected inside you. And once it has reached maturity, then they let go of you. So you can go out there with the knowledge or experience you have. Now you go out there into life, and now what lives up here now is brought down and applied to life. And the stuff that they have taught you, the stuff that are useful, you keep, and then you better them. Because every teacher comes from a different tradition, a different time in history. You know, for example, I may be able to give you some things. Many things will be garbage, some things will be good. Then you have to take those things to your life. But you have 3 kids. Then you have to apply what I've given you. And 80% of what I gave you that you thought would be good are garbage. They're no good. But those 20%, that's all you need to make your life work. You know, do you know Arthur Ashe? Arthur Ashe, he's an African American tennis player. He got AIDS and passed away. The center court, U.S. Open tennis, it's named after him, Arthur Ashe Stadium. He went to Africa, somewhere in Africa. He played with a young kid. His name was Yannick Noah, who later won French Open and a couple of other tournaments, big tournaments. Yannick Noah was 9. Arthur Ashe was a professional tennis player. Yannick Noah served ace. He aced Arthur Ashe. Arthur Ashe said to him, why don't you come with me to America? I'll train you. I'll pay for everything. So what you have is a potential in a 9-year-old. Talks to the parents, talks to the tribe, talks to also the people, asks permission, brings him here, and treats him like a son. Yannick Noah became #1 tennis player for maybe 6-7 months. That's how things are done. That you have to show yourself. Someone must like what you've shown. Okay? And then if what you have expressed is to the interest of this person and they think they can make it better, they will adopt you, so to speak. And then they will train you. And you have to wake up at 5 in the morning, do all sorts of things, you know. And these are usually uncommon things that you have to do, things that you think you shouldn't be asked, but you are. And if you're able to overcome some things, then 5, 6, 10 years down the road, then you will understand, and then you will reap the benefits. But this is a self-help or how-to culture. I just can do it on my own. And for me, that doesn't work. But it may work for people here, I don't know.
Hopefully, we're all about self, you know? We don't rely on each other or even in households, like, oh, we gotta be kicked out by this time. We really don't lean or support each other. So we're all.
I don't think that's true. I think when you go to AA, initially these are people who are very individuals, very independent, but then they're smacked down by the disease, alcoholism, and then they find a group. And all the people in that group suffer the same, have gone through the same stuff. And then they help each other out. And I think all communities, and there's a passage in the Quran, and I think for the most part it's true, that every person has a community to which they can belong. If I have found my disease, if I care to overcome that disease, there is a community out there. It's not going to be advertised because they don't want casual people in them. I want to go out there, stand and say, I am Amir Sabzavari, an alcoholic, and I want to overcome it. And people in the group know I'm going to have many relapses. People in the group know I'm going to suffer a good amount of anxiety, irritation, anger, that I want to leave. And every time they don't see me, they'll call, where the hell are you? If there is an urgency to you, doors will open. I mean, that's something you just need to trust and have faith in. If you're earnest, if you're really curious and interested, and if you're suffering, doors will open. Even if it's a door of acceptance, it will open. With some patience and awareness, it'll come your way. But the problem is you just have to keep knocking. And to knock means you can't forget knocking. You have to keep knocking. صد فصل بهار آید و بیرون ننهم گام ترسم که بیایی تو و در خانه نباشم. That you keep telling me that you're going to knock on my door, you're going to come visit. I waited for like 4 months and I want to go to Safeway. But all of a sudden as I'm in the car, I'm saying, what if I go to Safeway today and she shows up? You know, and that's the thing. اگر یار ناز کند تو نیاز کن. That if they're playing hard to get, you keep expressing your poverty and your desire for it. If you knock 1,000 times and you're about to give up, they were looking for the 1,001 knock for them to come through. And that's how things work. Sometimes you really have to knock for many, 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 many decades for something to open. And it's not really up to you. Listen, I don't want to keep you guys any longer. I know some of you have things to do. So, Erin, it's good to see you. Terry, good to see you. Olivia, good to see you. Junaid. تشکر. خداحافظ شما. Maybe that zipper is open on the side. I'm sorry. Yeah. Yeah. There's this one. Just take it. Maybe there is money in it. Oh, bye.